When the lights finally went out, it didn't look dramatic from the outside. No storm, no accident, no headline. Just a person lying on their back in a small, quiet room, staring at the ceiling and feeling nothing move inside. They had a name, but this could be anyone. It could be you, or the person next to you on a train, or the woman in the supermarket line counting coins twice, or the man laughing a little too loudly at something that isn't funny. Let's call them you, because in some way parts of this story belong to all of us. You didn't wake up one day and suddenly lose yourself. It happened slowly. At first, it was just tiredness, the kind you explained away. I've been working a lot. Everyone feels this way sometimes. I just need a weekend off. The messages came in silenced and unanswered. Work tasks piled up in polite, color-coded lists. The people who loved you assumed you were just busy. You were grateful they didn't know the truth, because you didn't know how to explain it. How do you explain that brushing your teeth feels like climbing a mountain? That returning a simple text feels like writing an exam? That getting out of bed feels like lifting the weight of the entire planet? On paper, nothing was wrong enough. You were not in a war. Your city still stood. Your body still worked. People reminded you gently, or not so gently, that others had it worse. You repeated that line to yourself like a command. Other people have it worse. I have no right to feel this way. So you learned a new kind of loneliness, being unable to validate your own pain. There were reasons, of course. There are always reasons. Maybe in your version of this story, it started with a loss. You didn't know how to grieve a breakup, a death, a friendship that faded instead of exploded, which somehow hurt more because there was no clear ending. Maybe it started when your plans fell apart. The dream school said, no, the business failed quietly. The career you'd invested your whole identity into turned out to be a cage with good lighting. Maybe it began with the weight of 1,000 expectations from family culture society, that unkind voice in your head, all whispering, be more, be better, be fixed by now. For you, it was a mix of these things, little disappointments that over time became a heavy permanent rain. At first, you tried to outrun it, new hobbies, new goals, new playlists, new people. When that didn't work, you tried to outthink it. Books, podcasts, videos, endless scrolling quotes about mindset and positivity and choosing happiness. You collected advice like souvenirs, but nothing truly landed, because there was one idea lodged deep inside you like a thorn. If I were stronger, I wouldn't feel this way at all. The darkest moment didn't arrive with dramatic music. It came on an ordinary evening. The city outside your window was alive, glowing. Cars moved, people laughed. Someone somewhere was probably taking selfies, clinking glasses, announcing something wonderful had just happened. Notifications lit your phone. The world spun on, and you lay there, feeling like you had fallen behind life itself. It wasn't just sadness. Sadness still meant you were connected enough to care. This was something colder, heavier. You watched your own life like a movie you had quietly walked out of. The messages went unanswered again. A meeting was missed, then another. You lied softly, politely, about why, until the lies exhausted you more than the truth. The truth was simple and terrifying. You didn't know how to continue. You imagined disappearing, not with violence or headlines, but just slipping out of your life, turning off your phone, ignoring everyone, letting everything you built collapse around you like a house made of paper. A thought drifted through your mind like smoke. Maybe nothing I do matters. Not in a philosophical, big picture way, but in a sharp, personal way. If I do well, people move on. If I fail, people move on. If I'm here or not. Life goes on without me. It was the most dangerous thought you'd ever had. Not because it looked dangerous from the outside, but because it felt completely reasonable inside your own head. That night it felt like your life narrowed to a tiny dark room your mind had built, with no doors and no windows. You thought, this is it. This is who I am now, broken, stuck, and pretending. You thought that was the end of the story. It wasn't. The first crack in that darkness didn't come as a miracle. It came as a small, almost annoying need thirst. You were lying there, eyes heavy body, heavier, when your throat started to burn. You tried to ignore it. It got worse. Eventually, with a kind of irritated resignation, you whispered to yourself, "Fine." You swung your legs over the side of the bed. Your body protested. The floor was cold. You walked to the kitchen, poured yourself a glass of water, and stood there in the dim light, listening to the sound of your own breathing. It was such a small thing. So small it felt ridiculous to notice. But something very quiet in you observed, "I didn't want to move at all today. But I just did." You drank the water. It didn't fix anything. The heaviness didn't melt. The problems didn't vanish. But your brain, always watching, logged this fact. In its silent archive, you moved, even when you didn't want to. That was the first thread. The second thread came a few days later, in the form of a message you had been ignoring. It wasn't dramatic, just a simple line from someone in your life. "Hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. You don't have to explain anything. Just send any emoji so I know you're alive." You stared at the screen for a long time. The old you would have replied with a joke, an apology, a long explanation. The you lying in bed felt like replying at all was impossible. But the wording of the message left you no room for excuses. Just send any emoji. So you did. You picked one almost at random, the smallest gesture. You tapped, sent, dropped the phone. A few seconds later, your screen lit up. "Good. I'm glad you're here. That's enough for today." Your chest hurt a little, like a muscle being used again after a long time. You hadn't said, "I'm not okay." You hadn't said, "I'm drowning." You hadn't said, "Please don't give up on me," but somehow that message had answered all three. You didn't know it yet, but you had just taken your second step, letting yourself be seen, even just a fraction of a millimeter more than yesterday. Everyone's rock bottom looks different. Yours wasn't a single event. It was more like waking up to the realization that you had been living underwater for months and calling it normal. The change did not come as a sudden burst of motivation. It arrived more like a question whispered inside you. What if this isn't the final version of me? At first, you rejected it immediately. Of course, this is who I am. I've always been too sensitive, too weak, too behind, too much of a mess. But the question stayed patient and quiet. What if I'm not broken, just exhausted? What if this isn't the end, just a chapter? You didn't believe it, not yet, but you felt the tiniest shift, an irritation with your own suffering, not in a self-hating way, but in a "I don't want this to be the whole story" way. That irritation became the seed of change. Because when you are truly done, not with life, but with this particular version of your life, a space opens for something else. It started with tiny negotiations between you and yourself. You made a deal with your body before your mind was ready. "I will not demand greatness from you," you told yourself silently one morning. "I will only demand the small, almost insulting steps." You wrote it down somewhere, maybe in a note on your phone, maybe on the back of an envelope. Get out of bed and stand for 10 seconds. Drink one full glass of water. Open the window for fresh air. Step outside your door, even if only to the hallway balcony or front step. Not a full workout, not perfect nutrition, not a new life plan. Just this. Some days you did one, some days you did none. Some days unexpectedly you did more. You still felt heavy, but those small acts became tiny pieces of evidence against the story that you were completely powerless. Your brain again took notes. Today was bad, but I still drank water. I still opened the blinds. I still replied with an emoji. There is a difference between "I did nothing" and "I did something small." You didn't know it, but this is how coming back to life often starts, not with fireworks, but with a glass of water and a message sent from the edge of your capacity. At some point, not the first day, not the first week, but eventually, you did something that scared you more than staying in the dark. You asked for help with real words. Maybe it was a therapist or a counselor or a doctor. Maybe it was a friend, a sibling, a partner, someone you trusted, just enough to risk disappointing. Your voice shook when you said it. It's not okay. I'm not okay. I don't know what's happening to me. You expected judgment lectures, comparisons. You expected someone to confirm your worst fear. Yes, you're weak. Yes, you should be better by now. Yes, you're a burden. But that didn't happen. Instead, you heard something like, "Thank you for telling me. I felt like that before too. Let's figure this out together. Or maybe we can talk. We can find a professional. We can make a plan." And for the first time in a long time, the weight you were carrying shifted slightly from me alone to me and someone else. You still didn't fully trust it. You still apologized too much. You still minimized your pain with phrases like, "It's not that bad, and other people are dealing with more." But the door was open now, even just a crack. You were no longer entirely alone in the room. Recovery did not move in a straight line. This is important because so many stories pretend it does. You did not wake up one morning stretch and think, the depression is gone, the anxiety is gone, the grief is gone, I'm me again. No, some days the darkness came back stronger than ever, angry that you had dared to challenge it. Some days you had energy, made plans, thought I'm finally better, and then collapsed into exhaustion again the next week. Some days you smiled and meant it. Other days you smiled and faked it. Both days counted. You learned that healing is less like climbing a staircase and more like walking up a winding mountain path. You circle back to the same views, but each time you're a little higher, even if you can't see the difference right away. You kept your deals with yourself as best you could. Move your body in any way today. Stretch, walk, dance to one song. Feed yourself something real, even if it's not healthy by internet standards. Just real. Answer one message from someone who genuinely cares. Spend 5 minutes without your phone, just breathing. Sometimes you broke those deals. You forgave yourself and tried again tomorrow. You learned something radical. Discipline is not punishment, it's care. Not a harsh discipline of get it together, what's wrong with you, but the softer kind that says, I know you don't feel like doing this. I also know that your future self is quietly begging you to. Along the way, you had to let go of illusions about normal. You had thought that returning to normal life meant becoming exactly who you were before everything fell apart. The productive one, the strong one, the one who never needed help, only gave it. The one who always had a plan, a direction, a purpose. But the more you healed, the more you realized you weren't meant to go back to that person. That version of you was doing their best with tools they had, but they also ignored their own needs, swallowed their feelings, and believed their value was tied to achievements, approval, and being fine all the time. You understood something quietly heartbreaking. Sometimes the version of you that collapses is the one that was never allowed to rest. Returning to life did not mean becoming your old self again. It meant becoming a self that allowed bad days without calling them permanent failures, allowed rest without labeling it laziness, allowed slowness in a world obsessed with speed. Allowed. I don't know yet, in a world that demands constant clarity. You didn't magically stop existing in a society that praises hustle, productivity, and constant self improvement. But you started to choose differently. You began measuring your days in a new way, not by how impressive they looked from the outside, but by how honest they felt on the inside. A good day was not one with a long to do list checked off. It was a day when you noticed the sun on your face and didn't brush it off as meaningless. You laughed at something silly and didn't immediately feel guilty for feeling better. You allowed yourself to cry and didn't apologize for taking up emotional space. You said no to something that drained you, and yes to something small that nourished you. You still had deadlines, bills, responsibilities. Not everyone could be kind. Not every system was fair. But inside your own life, you started making tiny choices that said, I am a person, not just a machine. You started saying things like, I can't do everything today, but I can do this one thing. I don't have to explain my low days to everyone. Feeling this way doesn't make me broken, it makes me human. Slowly, so slowly, you didn't notice at first the world outside your window began to look less like a movie you were watching and more like a place you could live in again. You still had moments of emptiness, but they were no longer the entire day. You still had waves of anxiety, but they no longer convinced you that you were dying every time. You still had nights when your mind raced, but some of those nights you now knew what to do. You reached out to someone. You wrote your thoughts down instead of letting them spin. You reminded yourself, I've survived every other night like this. You learned to separate facts from feelings. Feeling like a failure did not mean you were one. Feeling alone did not mean nobody cared. Feeling hopeless did not mean there was no hope. There were still setbacks, a harsh comment from someone, a plan that didn't work out, an old memory that surfaced and dragged you under for a while. Each time you feared, I'm back at the start. But you weren't. You had skills now. You had awareness. You knew how to do something you once thought impossible. Ask yourself, what do I need right now? And then try as best you could to give yourself at least a fraction of it. Gradually, your life became recognizable again. Not identical to before, different, but recognizable. You woke up not with excitement yet, but with something softer willingness. You went to work or school or whatever your daily field of effort was. You showed up imperfectly. You made mistakes. You corrected them. Sometimes you had energy. Sometimes you didn't. You did your best. Some days your best was a lot. Some days your best was survival. Both counted. You reconnected with people, not all of them, just the ones whose presence felt like oxygen and not obligation. You didn't tell everyone the full story of your darkness. Some didn't earn that level of truth. But with a few, you were honest. And when you were honest, you discovered people you thought were strong had their own nights like yours. People you'd admired from a distance had also sat in small rooms thinking they were failing at life. You realized almost no one gets through this world without encountering that room. The difference was not who avoided it. The difference was who learned to knock on the door, sit next to someone inside it, and say, You're not crazy. You're not weak. You're not alone. I've been here too. You decided you wanted to be one of those people. One day, after months of slow, clumsy, quiet work on yourself, something happened that would have once ruined you. A plan fell apart. A person disappointed you. A door you wanted to open closed firmly in your face. You felt the old spiral tugging at you. Of course, this always happens. This proves I'm a failure. Nothing ever works out. Why do I try? But then something new happened. A different voice spoke up inside you. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady. Wait, we've been here before, and we didn't die. We didn't stay stuck. We know how this goes now. You still cried, you still hurt. You still felt the familiar ache of not enough. But underneath it, there was a layer of trust in the fact that you could survive your own emotions. Trust in the evidence that you had already climbed out of darkness once, step by irritating step. Trust that this pain too was a chapter, not the entire book. You didn't collapse this time. You wobbled, yes. You took a day off, maybe two. You allowed yourself to be human, tired, disappointed, sad. You reached out instead of shutting down completely. And then, slowly, you moved again. You saw something clearly, maybe for the first time. Strength is not never breaking. It's learning how to bend, how to rest, how to rebuild. So, how do you come back to normal life after your darkest moment? The truth you discovered is this: you don't go back. You go forward carrying everything you've seen in the dark, but not letting it define you. You return to life in pieces. The piece of you that still laughs at stupid memes. The piece of you that cries at songs without knowing why. The piece of you that wants to be useful. The piece of you that just wants to rest. and beheld. The piece of you that is still scared. The piece of you that, despite everything, still hopes a little. Normal life isn't a perfect, polished picture where you never fall again. Normal life is this. You have days when the sky looks sharp and beautiful, and you feel grateful for no particular reason. You have days when everything is gray, but you know now that gray isn't forever. You have mornings when you wake up heavy and still choose to swing your feet to the floor. You have nights when the old thoughts knock on your door, and sometimes you let them in just to tell them, I hear you, but you don't run this place anymore. You are not healed forever. You are healing over and over, and that you realize is what it means to be alive. This story is not about one person. It's about billions of quiet battles happening every day in every country, every language, every time zone. Someone standing in the shower, letting the water hide their tears. Someone closing their eyes on a crowded train, trying not to panic. Someone writing a message that says, Hey, are you free to talk? Someone drinking a glass of water when all they want is to disappear. Someone Googling therapist near me and closing the tab 5 times before finally booking the appointment the 6th time. It's about you and the stranger listening to the same story on the other side of the world. Both thinking, wait, that's me. If you're in that dark room right now, this is not a promise that everything will be easy. It is not a slogan, not a cliche. It is simply this. You are not weak for feeling this way. You are not alone in feeling this way. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not behind in life. You are on a path that includes valleys, not just mountaintops. Your comeback will not look like a movie montage. It will look like a glass of water at 2 a.m., an emoji sent when words feel impossible, a shower taken after 3 days of not caring, a short walk around the block, a slow, shaky phone call that begins with, Hey, I'm not okay. A decision repeated again and again, I will try one more day. One day, not too far from now, someone will look at you and say, You're so strong. I don't know how you do it. You'll smile a little tired, a little wiser, and think, if only you knew. I didn't become strong by never falling. I became strong by learning how to stand up slowly, with help, every time I did. And in that moment, you'll realize you didn't go back to who you were before the darkness. You became someone deeper, softer, and more real. Someone who understands that in the end, we're all just trying to find our way back to the light, one small, ordinary step at a time.